everyone, it's Sevy. I have a question. Have you seen builds with eye-watering attack, crit, or EM stats, but with an ER stat like this? In this video, I'm going to discuss two key concepts, energy recharge or ER, and team rotations, and how these two factor together in improving your character builds and team gameplay. Now, I've encountered builds that stack impressive amounts of attack and crit stats, but all the while having barely any ER or none at all. When you're trying to get the best damage per screenshot, this might be okay, as all you need is to catch that juicy number and call it a day. In the open world and early AR, ER doesn't feel as much of a problem because it seems like we get so much energy orbs from easily defeating lots and lots of enemies. However, ER starts to matter more against challenging content like event challenges, bosses, and later floors in Spiral Abyss where they don't drop orbs or particles as often as we're used to in the open world. Chaining all your team's abilities now depends more on having sufficient ER, and lacking ER can even be a DPS loss as some characters and teams may depend on their burst as a significant damage source. In fact, if your team's rotations feel off, one culprit may be not having enough ER, which is why this video is all about explaining the importance of ER in team rotations. So before I proceed, just a disclaimer that this is meant to be a more beginner to intermediate friendly guide, not an in-depth exploration or all the mechanics of energy generation and team rotations. And more importantly, at the end of the day, what I discuss are just recommendations for optimizing your DPS. If you get through even challenging content just perfectly fine, then what works for you is completely valid, and I always advocate playing the game in the most fun way for you. With those in mind, let's begin. First of all, a quick refresher on how energy recharge works. Bursts require an energy cost to cast. Energy comes from all kinds of sources, but mainly from orbs and particles, which you can get via dropping your enemy's HP, defeating them, and using skills or certain effects. For the most part, particles generated by character skills are your primary source of energy. In this example, Ayaka's skill generates 4 cryo particles and some orbs due to reducing the enemy's HP. Particles and orbs can be elemental or non-elemental, and depending on the character's element and if they're the active or inactive character, particles give different values. You can pause and see the corresponding values in this table taken from the Genshin wiki site. Your ER stat then increases the energy received from the particles and orbs. For example, 150% ER will make 3 energy into 4.5 energy instead. 200% will double that into 6 energy. There are other ways of regenerating energy, like certain unit abilities or artifact effects. But these are not affected by ER since they regenerate a fixed amount of energy directly to the character, not through particles. Now let's connect ER's importance to team rotations. First, what is a rotation? A rotation is how you arrange your team's skills and burst. It's like a step-by-step process of how your team's abilities and attacks are used. A rotation is meant to set up your supports, time the abilities to work with one another, and produce the best damage scenario for your DPS units. Optimal rotations yield smooth sequences and increase the damage your team can achieve. Again, DPS in this context refers to damage per second, which takes into account your damage over time, not just the highest damage per screenshot number at any given point. Not getting your burst up on time can yield a DPS loss because you essentially lose seconds of your characters being unable to use their abilities. And in any good team, batteries are valuable to keep your rotations going. What are batteries? These are units that generate a lot of particles to refill your burst costs faster. A good example is Fischl or Bennett, who have faster particle generation rates than usual. But if the teams receiving the particles in the first place do not have enough ER, your batteries will have a harder time, well, batterying them. Team rotations can get slowed down or be clunky due to inadequate energy management. Here are 2 very simplified examples of how enough ER keeps the rotation intact. While we usually take into account the orbs dropped by defeated enemies, let's test these teams on the Array boss for more emphasis on energy needs. The first example is on Xiao. In this scenario, the main Animo battery is Sucrose equipped with sacrificial fragments, plus Albedo and Zhongli providing some geoparticles on the side. In the first attempt, let's see how it works. Xiao has 130% ER, with the rotation sequence on the lower left being followed. I'll only use 2 charges of Xiao to pretend he's at C0. Since this is the start of the battle, Sucrose's skill can be used in the next rotation where Xiao needs the particles. As you can see with Xiao, we use 2 charges of his skill to generate the particles, then immediately use his burst so that we can catch those particles with the burst cost depleted, meaning they will partially refill his burst cost. Otherwise, if we catch the particles before using his burst, those particles are wasted. And then we repeat the rotation with Sucrose now generating animal particles for the team and Xiao. And you'll see that Xiao has his burst cost ready by the time you switch back and catch the remaining particles from Sucrose. The result is that the rotation can be smoothly repeated. In this second demo though, Xiao now has only 100% ER. Let's repeat the same rotation. Here we also catch the particles right after casting his burst, but due to having no ER, you'll notice that the burst gets filled up slightly less than in the first run, and this effect cascades into the particles he receives onwards. At the end, there's a smidge of ER that needs refilling, which wasn't a problem versus the first case with enough ER on him. This has to be gained by either waiting for particles or by casting Xiao's skill and catching the animal particles. However, doing so means that we'd have to catch the particles generated first, then use the burst, but that means that they won't count towards refilling his burst after being cast. That will cascade to the next rotation, making it slower and more inefficient over time if you can't defeat the enemy fast enough. But like I said, this only really becomes a problem if you're trying to efficiently finish something in a limited time. Otherwise, we can take as much time as we need to restart our rotations. In a second example, I'll illustrate why even off-field units and supports need to have sufficient ER. In this case, it's Xingqiu and Bennett in a Yoimiya Vape team. In the first clip, Xingqiu has 190% ER and is equipped with a sack sword, while Bennett has 230% ER. As you can see, Bennett's burst is ready as soon as the rotation restarts, and switching to Xingqiu also shows a ready burst. In this case, the rotation smoothly repeats. In this second clip, I lowered Xingqiu's and Bennett's energy recharge stats to 160 and 170 respectively. Let's see the effect. Unlike the first clip, Bennett's burst still needs recharging by the time the rotation restarts, and switching to Xingqiu, his ER is also a tiny bit short to be ready right away. This means Bennett needs another skill to fill up everyone's bursts, which will take a few seconds more, causing you to lose some time in your run. We see what effects of reduced ER, even by just a bit, can have on rotations. Does having not enough ER make a team completely unusable? Absolutely not. You can still compensate by taking more time to recharge their bursts via their skill, but this comes at the expense of DPS downtime. I think a smooth rotation where you have to worry less about burst uptime feels much better. And these examples were teams with very simple rotation and energy management needs. But if you consider a more quick swap oriented team, like a Kazuha national team or Sukokomon team, that relies on consistent burst uptime, having enough ER becomes even more important. However, building too much energy recharge is also a potential problem. Going back to the same Yoimiya team before, I put an ER stance on Xingqiu to make him have 240% ER, and this is what happens. As you can see, Xingqiu's burst is already up with so much remaining cooldown left. While this practically guarantees he'll be ready when needed, it unfortunately sacrifices too much damage potential rather than using him at the previous build with an attack sans, wherein he's still ready when needed. Those ER stats from the artifacts could have instead gone to attack or crit, making the damage more optimized while still retaining sufficient ER needs. How do you know if you have enough ER? Character guide videos often have a recommended range of ER for characters, but honestly, the best thing you can do is pay attention to how your rotations feel and adapt accordingly, especially because it can vary according to your comp. For example, Xiangling in a comp with Bennett won't need as much ER compared to Xiangling in a comp where she's the only pyro. This is also one reason why Raiden is a sought-after unit, because she significantly contributes to your team's energy generation and burst uptime. But just be aware that she doesn't magically solve all your ER problems. Even with Raiden on your team, your characters should still have a sufficient amount of inherent ER. Of course, ER stats are not entirely in our control, because artifact RNG in Genshin is a lot of pain. But being aware of this info can definitely help you set goals for your artifact builds and understand how to better maximize your team's potential. And that's all for this video. This may sound like an awful lot of min-maxing at this point, but again, ER and rotations are not necessarily strict rules to follow, and you still need to learn to adapt to changing scenarios or mistakes. And if you want to relax and not care about these things, that's perfectly fine. Just think of this as a map that, if you want to follow accordingly, will get you to your destination faster. But ultimately, enjoying the journey is still important. If you're a starting or intermediate player who found this video informative, let me know. I'm really curious to see how interesting these learning the basics type videos are, and if I see it's helping a lot of people, I'd be more interested to give more time to creating more. Don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already for more Genshin guides and content, and I will see you all soon. Take care!